I don't often do this, but today I'm going to do it. I want to draw your attention to the bulletin. The back page contains this week some thought questions that we're going to look at later at the conclusion today. And I've added a couple that are not on this list, one of which I'm going to ask you to verbally respond to in our prayer circle, which we will have this morning. So at the end, I'm going to ask you a question of application that I really want to hear some of your responses, verbal responses. So be prepared for that. But take this list home with you, and I would like for you to spend some time with it this week as we look at Genesis chapter 12 and Hebrews chapter 11 this morning. The working title of this message, the one that's in your bulletin, I think, is Your Future in God's Hands, or Your Future in God's Hands. But as I gave further thought to it and was making application to my own life, a good title for this, and where we're going to end up today, is Make Me a Blessing. Make me a blessing. I would like for you to follow along with me in your copy of the Scriptures. I'm reading, first of all, from Genesis chapter 12. The first three verses, and these, anytime you hear Genesis 12, especially 1 through 3, you should have it locked away in your memory what this is about. It's very important. Not that the rest of the Bible isn't, but this is one of those passages you need to know by memory, at least the reference and what it's about. The Lord said to Abram, later to be named Abraham, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." The Hebrew writer, pointing back to the life of Abraham, includes these words about the faithful servant of God. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 through 19. "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, 'In Isaac your descendants shall be called.' And he considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type." Or your translation may say a parable. That's the biblical basis for what we want to talk about this morning. Before we get to the biblical story, I want to relate to you a story that is called The Black Door. The Black Door tells the story of a spy who was captured during a war in the Middle East many generations ago and was sentenced to death by the general of the Persian army. In this story, it tells about this general who had a most unusual practice. He gave the accused, in this case, this spy, a choice of facing the firing squad or passing through the black door. Sort of like choose your poison. Or my thought when I read about this story, which I don't know is factual, but my thought went to, this is the way my mind works. What's the show on TV, the old game show, where you could choose what's behind it? Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. The Price is Right. No? Let's make a deal. Okay, whatever it was. That's where my mind went. Here we're talking about a spy choosing the firing squad or the black door, and I'm thinking about the game show. We're talking about choices. Make a wise choice. Well, as the execution date approached, the general ordered the spy to come before him for a short, final interview. And the big question of that interview was whether the prisoner wanted to face the firing squad or to pass through this black door. It was not an easy decision for the prisoner. He hesitated and then chose the firing squad. Which would you have chosen? Wise words over here by Brother Cameron. Why did he choose the firing squad? Because the unknown horrors that lurked behind the black door was a greater threat to him than the known horrors of the firing squad. In other words, the familiar and known won out over the feared unknown. Well, soon after the choice was made, multiple gunshots rang out the fulfillment of the death sentence, and the spy lay dead. And then the general said these words to the people who were gathered around. He says, you see how it is with men? They will always prefer the known to the unknown. It's characteristic of people to be afraid of the unknown. And yet I gave him his choice. Well, then the witnesses, just killed by curiosity, wanted to know what lies beyond the black door. And the general said, freedom. And I've known only a few brave people to choose it. Well, Genesis 12 records the occasion when God called this 75-year-old man, Abram, later to be known as Abraham, from his home, from his family, from the familiar, from the known, to go to a land I will show you. Where's that? Would have been my question. It's the unknown. Now, the advantage Abraham had over that prisoner in the story we just related is that Abraham had the promise of God that he would be blessed by God and that his descendants would outnumber the stars of the sky and the grains of sand on the seashore, and that through his seed all the nations of the earth would be blessed. So Abraham obeyed God. He gathered up all his belongings, all his family members, his flocks, his herds, and he set out for, well, only God knows where. And when he arrived, God told Abraham to look around. Everything you can see, I will give to you. It belongs to you. Your descendants will outnumber the stars of the sky, the grains of sand on every seashore. Now, keep in mind, this is a 75-year-old man married to, and I say this respectfully, an old woman who was way beyond the age of bearing children. And in fact, she was barren. And so this promise would require a miracle. And
she was buried.
That's what took place. Sarai delivered a son, named him Isaac, a son of promise. And the events that took place after that taught Abraham the lesson, and here's our lesson for today, that his future rested in or through Isaac, but depends upon God. I want you to think this morning about your future in God's hands. Your future and God's hands. In Isaac was Abraham's hope, or so he thought. And then we come to Genesis chapter 22. And that's another chapter you need to have locked away in your mind as to what that's about. You don't remember the story. God told Abraham to take his son, his only son, the son of promise, the one through whom all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Take him up on that mountain and offer him as a sacrifice to God. And you know what happened. God told Abraham to kill this son of promise. And it's teaching Abraham that it was through Isaac that this promise would be fulfilled. His future rested in or through Isaac, but depended upon God. In other words, his hope was not in Isaac. His hope was to be in God. God promised to bring it about through Isaac. Just how God was going to do that, Abraham did not know. Now, it's our nature, and we've observed it in ourselves, that we tend to focus on the wrong things. We tend to focus on the things that are here and now. We tend to look at history in our own finite context because we are finite people. We don't know everything. But we serve a God who knows the end from the beginning. We serve a God who is eternal. We serve a God who is not bound by time or space. He knows everything. He can be everywhere at the same time. These are things that are beyond our comprehension. He has always existed. We can't even think about that. And so where we're going this morning is not to put our hope in finite temporal things, but rather in the God who is over and above and apart from all of these things that we tend to focus on in our own lifetime. I want you to think about that with me this morning. We tend to focus on the wrong things. But what we want to do, we try to do, we need to continue working on doing is to look at things from God's perspective, from God's viewpoint, to develop eyes of faith so that we can adopt and adapt to God's eye view of history and the world. Now, each of us can probably look back on circumstances in our lives with regret at times because we have wasted a lot of time, we've wasted money, we've wasted energy on things that we needlessly worried about or panicked over. And you can look back on your life and you can identify times when you thought, man, this is hopeless, this is tragic, I can't believe what's happening here, what's going to happen. Most of you can remember 1999. What was on everybody's mind in 1999? Y2K. Remember when that was such a big story? Y2K. Why, when that ball drops in Times Square on January 1, year 2000, there's going to be this great big worldwide cataclysmic something. And there were a lot of people who got a lot of worked up over that. Did a lot of crazy things. What year are we in now? 2021. 21 years ago. 21 years and 2 weeks ago. Or 1 week ago. That's where we were in this whole world. A lot of time, a lot of energy. Wasted, worry, needless panic. I can well imagine the humiliation experienced by the fear mongers when their predictions of doom and gloom were proven wrong. Of course, some of those people have no shame anyway, but if I had been involved in that and gotten all worked up and worried and concerned and fretted and posted on Facebook, which I don't even know was a thing then, about my worries and concerns, and the world's going to end, the sky is falling, I think I would have wakened up on New Year's morning thinking, what a fool I am. Well, the point of this is to say that despite the legitimacy of concerns created by circumstances and world events, our future does not depend upon man, but upon God. We know that intellectually. We've accepted that by our admittedly weak faith. But our question this morning is, of me, I invite you to ask it yourself, am I living it? And how am I living it? So instead of, one writer says, instead of reading the prognosticators and pundits of our day, we should read the revelation of God's eternal plan. Instead of wringing our hands in worry and concern, we should fold our hands in prayer. Instead of preparing for self-preservation in this life, we should be helping others prepare for eternity. And then this writer concludes, if we view the future from God's perspective, we will give more, serve more, live more, and love more while we have the energy and time. I've been to Hobby Lobby a few times. Michael's, craft stores, craft shows, when I'm drugged there. Silver Dollar City. And everywhere I go in these kinds of places, I see the same sign. Live, laugh, love. You've been there too. Live, laugh, love. That's a good philosophy. I could probably build a sermon off of that. I could find scripture for all of that. The key to it is not just saying the words, not just hanging a picture or a plaque on the wall. It's learning better how to trust and put my hope in God. Not me, not people, not circumstances, but God. Now, our future is impacted by the choices we make. Our future is impacted by world events. Our future is impacted by the things that happen. But the future is not dependent upon man. It's dependent upon God. And so my exhortation, the sermon to me today is, and if you'll accept it, the sermon for you today is, to be more committed to God. To choose to make God my hope. And I can apply that to every part of my life, including world and national events. We get focused on election outcomes. We've just been through that. And how the future depends upon electing the right people, and I'm all for that. We should do our best at that. Sure, elections impact our future. Elections impact our lives. But our future depends upon God. Our future is in God's hands. And that needs to be more than just a trite statement or spiritual sentiment of my admittedly weak faith. It needs to be the way I live. We must live in this confidence. We must live this reality. And that demands resignation and sacrifice on my part. Resignation of my will and my claim to self-governance. No. I sold out to God back in 1967 in a baptistry in a church building on Ash Street in Columbia. I died to self as much as I could at that age. And I've continued to try every day to crucify self, to crucify self, crucify self. It requires resignation to my will and my claim to self-governance, my sacrifice of my will, my power over my destiny. Abraham, the father of the faithful, apparently had adopted God's perspective as he took his promised son up that mountain that day, knowing he was going to sacrifice that son in obedience to God. Don't ask me. I don't know. How does that fit into God's plan? The Bible doesn't fill us in on everything going through Abraham's mind, but you can play the game yourself, can't you? What? Why? That's the apparent lesson from Hebrews 11, 17 to 19, which we read a while ago. Obeying God. And that leads me to ask myself these questions. You ask them of yourself. And I'm getting real close to asking you a question I'm going to ask you to answer out loud. What hopes of yours have been dashed? What dreams or aspirations of yours have not been realized? What goals have eluded you? You've not yet fulfilled your goals. What disappointment has shaken your hope? What disappointments in your life have caused your hope to wane, diminish? And then I have to ask myself this question. Am I willing, and I'm not drawing any kind of equivalency to sacrificing your only son, the son of promise, through whom all the nations of the world would be blessed. I'm not drawing an equivalence here. I'm drawing an application for me of principle, okay? In other words, I'm not facing the kind of decision Abraham had to make that day. My decisions are much less than that. But if I'm not doing well in these lesser considerations, I'm sure not going to be up there with Abraham climbing that mountain to sacrifice his only son. Okay, with that little disclaimer, here's my question to myself. Am I willing to climb that mountain today and lay down my hopes, my aspirations, my dreams, my wealth, my resources, even my family or children on the altar of sacrifice to God as an expression of my faith in God as being my hope, not any of the things I just mentioned being my hope. Am I willing to climb that mountain as my statement of confidence that my future is in God's hands? That's my question of myself. And I invite you to ask it of yourself. Are you willing to climb that mountain? So here are some questions of application. What can I decide today to do every day to live this way? What can I do today what can I decide today to do every day to live this way? What practice could I adopt that would help me remember that my hope is in God, not in these temporal matters that take up so much of my attention, my energy, my money, my time, and my worrying? I'll tell you what some people do. Some people make application to this lesson by spending time reading the Bible every day before they ever listen to or watch the news or turn on social media. That's a pretty good resolution right there. Before you get engaged in all of the concerns that the world is throwing at you, spend time with God. Center yourself on the true Word of God, His faithfulness in every circumstance of life. That even when it looks like you're going to sacrifice everything you are and have, God is my hope. Remember that. Have that in my mind, in my heart, before I ever turn the TV on or the radio or open the newspaper or get on Facebook or whatever you do in the morning. Let's get God's perspective on things first so we can handle properly what's going to be bombarding us the rest of today. That would be a good thing you could decide today to do every day to live this way. Now here's my question that I want you to think about. Not that I'm done. I want you to think of a practical way. I'm not talking about theory, I'm not talking about an idea, I'm talking about something you could actually do. Practice, practical. In what practical way can I communicate to the lost people around me that my future and the future is in God's hands? I want you to teach me in our circle this morning. Give me some ideas. What practical way can I communicate to the lost people around me that the future is in God's hands? Think of a real thing I can do to communicate to lost people that God is in charge. Not me and not them and not any man. All right, I want you to think about that. And since you're all good multitaskers, I want you to think about it while I conclude. God promised Abraham that he would bless Abraham and that he would bless all nations through Abraham's seed, his lineage. And Abraham had many, many reasons to question this. I'm an old man, my wife's an old woman who's never had any children. How in the world are you going to make this happen? He had many reasons to question it. He had a lot of opportunities to doubt that God was going to fulfill it. In fact, Abraham, the father of the faithful, on occasion, at least twice, lied about Sarah, his sister, not his wife, so to preserve his own life. Remember that? Twice. And Abraham tried to finagle and tried to manipulate, and he slept with his, let me see, what was she called? Handmaid? Whose name also? Hagar, thank you. And had this child by her, Ishmael, thinking that through him, God was going to fulfill. Okay. Abraham was a real man. He was real. So he had several reasons and several opportunities to doubt God's faithfulness, you might say, to fulfill the promise. And Abraham, despite his faults, is yet known as the father of the faithful. Of course, the blessing, the seed of Abraham, is Jesus. Through Isaac, Jesus came to us. And as sons of Abraham, we are called upon to bless our world by our faith and our faithfulness. Again, no equivalence here. The Messiah is not going to come through my lineage. The Messiah has already come. I'm not saying that the world's going to be saved through my lineage, but I have a responsibility to my world to live the way Abraham lived. I've made some of the same mistakes Abraham made. And God can still find me faithful if I decide today to live this way. There's a song we sang years